The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Loneliness isn't just unpleasant. It turns out it's also bad for your health and for social cohesion. So tonight, we'll look for solutions that foster connection and combat the isolation affecting more of us than ever. Then, journalist and author Julian Sher is here with the lesser-known and frankly dreadful story of Canadian involvement with the Confederate side during the American Civil War. It's Wednesday, May 10th, and that's next on The Agenda. Maybe one of the very few silver-ish linings of the pandemic is that it became much easier to talk about loneliness when people were isolated and literally socially distant. And that's good, because even before COVID, there was mounting concern about a loneliness epidemic. That was raised again recently by the American Surgeon General, who called for a national strategy there on social cohesion and connection. With us on what they're seeing here and how to tackle loneliness, we're joined by Pete Bombaci. He is founder and executive director of the not-for-profit Gen Well Project that aims to be a Canadian-led global human connection movement. David Kepis is here, CEO of Companion Link, a registered charity that connects isolated people, particularly seniors, with volunteers for social connection. Miriam Amder, founder of the 52 Friends Project, which is on a mission to reduce the stigma around loneliness and prioritize friendship. And Steve Jordans, professor of psychology at the University of Toronto, Scarborough. And it is great to have all of you around our table tonight for what is, sadly, a very timely discussion. And I want to set it up, if I can, with the following graphic. Sheldon, why don't you bring these numbers up and I'll read along for those listening on podcast at home. How lonely are we? We asked the question. 60% of Canadians are feeling somewhat or much lonelier since the start of the pandemic. 60%. 40% of Canadians say they want to have more friends. 77% of people who have poor self-rated physical health are also lonely. There's a connection there. Let's do some more. Gen Z or Z, depending on how you want to pronounce it, mid-teens to 24. That's the loneliest generation today compared to all the older generational cohorts. Those who greeted strangers at least once a week were almost 3 times more likely to be happy. All of this data, incidentally, from the Canadian Social Connection Survey from the year 2021. All right, let's find out about what all of you do. David, Companion Link is what?
So Companion Link is a charity that matches volunteers one-on-one with socially isolated seniors. And at its absolute core concept is the goal to just make a friend. You can't put a value on the feeling of being valued, and to have someone who knows your name, who wants to hear from you, who wants to pay attention to you. And it's something that, as you just noted, we are all, but certainly from my perspective, seniors in particular, are lacking today.
Why did you start it?
So I started Companion Link about 3 years ago. In fact, almost to the day now. My grandparents were at a long-term care facility in Toronto that was the site of one of the early major outbreaks of COVID-19. Both my grandparents contracted it. My grandmother fortunately survived. My grandfather passed away shortly thereafter. And of course, if you cast your mind back to that time, this is the beginning of the lockdowns. So at that time, my wife, myself, and a friend of ours, we approached the home and said, how would you feel about us FaceTiming the residents just to keep them company? And that grassroots effort snowballed into the organization that we have today.
Great. 52 Friends is what?
So beginning in October of 2022, I made it my goal to make one friend a week. I was experiencing a period of loneliness, and I thought that a way for me to help with that is to meet one friend a week and to document it. And I realized that a lot of other people are struggling with loneliness, especially people my age. I'm 25, so I think that that's kind of a point in our lives when we move from our childhood friends to our adult friends, and that can be difficult for a lot of people. And so I started 52 Friends with the goal to raise awareness around the loneliness stigma, because I think that a lot of the times we see loneliness as a weakness when it shouldn't be. And also to encourage us all to prioritize friendship, because friendship is really an important part of our social health, and we often put it on the back burner.
It's a neat idea, one friend a week. Where did that come to you from?
I really like meeting people and documenting stories and meeting strangers. So I thought that would be a cool way to do it. And it made me more comfortable meeting people. I think it gave me this platform where I could easily reach out to someone and say I'm working on this project and document it that way.
Is it actually working? Are you making a friend a week?
I am. I've also kind of switched it since I've started to also reconnect with people that I may have lost touch with, because I think old friends are just as important as new friends. I actually read you can't make an old friend, so it's great to reach out to someone because you can look back on memories and talk about things you've gone through in the past. So it's really switched from just being new friends to reconnecting with old friends, and that's what's been really nice about the project.
Great. Pete, GenWell is what?
GenWell is a human connection movement. We're Canada's human connection movement, and our mission is to make the world a happier and healthier place by educating, empowering, and catalyzing Canadians around the importance of face-to-face social connection for their health, their happiness, their longevity, and for the betterment of society. And we do that both on a national scale through daily postings of tips, tools, ideas, and research on our social channels and website. But we also work in workplaces, in classrooms, in communities, educating people about the importance of their social health, which has a positive impact on their mental and physical health.
And why did you start it?
Do you know, it's interesting. It happened not far from this studio during the summer blackout of 2003, when what I saw that night was when we turned off all the other distractions that we have in our life, people came together and they connected face to face, and oftentimes with people, whether it was a neighbor that they used to walk by or wave at as they were leaving, but they never knew each other, but they took the time that night. And I have stories from neighborhoods to workplaces where people who'd never talked before built strong friendships that have carried on from that day. And what you really realize is sometimes we just need an excuse, a catalyst, and certainly an understanding of why connecting with people is so important for our health and happiness.
Well, I can tell you all, and our viewers and listeners as well, that the catalyst for the program you're on right now is this guy sitting right here, who's been a guest on our program many times in the past, but you thought this was a particularly good time to revisit this issue. How come?
Yeah, well, I mean, during the pandemic, I was trying to find ways to help, and I knew everybody was very anxious, so I created a free course to help people understand anxiety and manage it. But I was also routinely in the media giving tips and suggestions about what people should do. And one of those tips and suggestions, a big one, is social connection. The research is just so clear on how powerful a tool this is, literally to bring people happiness, to help their physical health, to help their social health. Well, it is their social health, sorry, their mental health. Those three things we can kind of consider all tied together, and the social health really feeds the other two. So I'm sort of coming at it from a scientific perspective. What scientists really need are people that are taking this data and mobilizing it and bringing it to the people that need it. And all three of these people became heroes to me. I was sort of, during the pandemic, I've been looking for heroes, and I've been finding them. And so any chance to work with them and to support what they're doing, I'm there 100%.
We know that during the pandemic, it was a really, really tough and you might even say awful time for so many people in terms of human connection. Now that the pandemic is, I don't want to say over, but shall we say more manageable, more under control, are we coming out of that?
Well, I mean, there's a bit of a hangover, a bit of a shadow, I think. I mean, it was a long enough period of time that people have sort of restructured habits a little bit. There's also the potential of fear that's come out of the pandemic. We associate a lot of anxiety with close proximity to other people and such. And so, you know, I think it was an issue, and Pete can tell you this well, before the pandemic already, but I think the pandemic has just sort of exacerbated it more, and especially, as you suggested, for those younger people who are, I think, really struggling now.
Do you see that, Pete? Because I got to tell you, I do notice, as odd as this sounds, many people I bump into have kind of forgotten how to have face-to-face contact. They've spent so much time on their devices over the pandemic, they've lost the skill of interpersonal connection. You see that?
I think we can see this just when we think about not going to the gym for a period of time. And what's it like when we go back to the gym that first time? It's not so easy. And so I think what we're seeing is people have gotten set in new ways, whether that's binge watching TV, whether that's on your digital technology, whatever the other solutions were to help us cope with 2 years of being masked up and locked down. Now we actually have to help people. And this is really what the movement's all about, which is the solution to our disconnected world should not be a medical one where we wait until people are lonely or sick before we try to help. It's about awakening all Canadians, 38 million of us, to say, hey, you can be part of the solution. And it starts with saying hello to a neighbor, saying hello to somebody that you walk by as a stranger, talking to old friends, to old colleagues. We can all be part of the solution. But I think the first step is educating people just on how important this is, which research now says it's more important than exercise and as important as eating well.
Have you found, I mean, you're the youngest among us here, and have you found that some of your friends have kind of lost the skill or forgotten how to communicate with each other?
I think so. I also think that happened to me, and that's why I started the project. Because we were spending all this time at home, working from home, only really talking to one another over text. And I think that we lost the ability to be able to have in-depth conversations and have quality conversations. And I've noticed that among my friends, and I think that's why our friendships have weakened, is because we lost the skill, and then we start to think that we don't need to work on it, that we just become comfortable with the way that we're living.
Now I got to ask you how we get out of it, because, and I assume, well, let me play a little gender politics here. I appreciate the fact that you think it's a great idea that we should all go out and try and meet a new friend a week, and the health benefits that will come from that. But there are obviously, there will be women who are watching this right now who will say to themselves, I'm not really comfortable with the idea of a guy who I don't know just sort of getting in my personal space and saying hi to me in public. I know they think they're being friendly, but we live in a different era nowadays. How do we figure all that out?
I think that you need to have tact in all of your interactions. So just important to think like what I want, just be tactful, I think, and be mindful of other people's space. I think we can usually feel when someone wants us to come up to them or not. So think of the environment that you're in. If you're at a networking event, you probably don't mind if people are coming up to you. If you're talking to your neighbor, you probably don't mind if he comes up to you. But if it's out of the blue and you're walking down the street with your groceries and someone's on the phone with you and then someone walks up to you, maybe you won't appreciate that.
No, I get that. And Steve, let me get some help from you on this as well, because one of the suggestions that I've read about is that you should say hi to a stranger, when you're walking down the street. Just say hello. Now, some people are going to be a little put off by that. So how do we handle all this?
Yeah, I mean, the research is kind of interesting. So the research suggests that most of us, if we're asked, what's going to happen if you go talk to a stranger? We think it's going to end horribly. We have what's called a fear of negative evaluation. We think they're not going to like us, they're not going to whatever. When you actually look at the experiments and the data, when you make that connection, at least 90% of the time it goes well. And the people feel very positively from it.
We don't worry about the 90, we worry about the 10.
We worry about the 10. And that is, in this story, we say, hey, there's this happy solution. We just need to do better social connection. But there's a villain in the story, and that villain is social anxiety. And in fact, we talk about young people losing the skill. It's unclear whether they ever developed it to the same extent where you and I did, because they've been communicating through social media for a long time. Social media does not give head nods, does not give all the nonverbals that when Miriam talks about having tact. We have to be able to read those signs to feel comfortable in a conversation. And I think a lot of young people were not given as much practice. And so they find it, even pre-pandemic, people coming to my office hours would say, this is really, it stresses me out, you're intimidating. I'd be, me? But to that generation, they feel this is a real challenge.
David, you may have started your program dealing with senior population. How about younger people? Are they involved in your efforts as well?
That was actually one of the biggest shifts for us about a year into our organization. I mean, we remain focused on reducing isolation amongst seniors, but the benefit to the volunteer, and we work with so many people who are, at sort of the student age or in their 20s or early 30s, what they can learn and what they can benefit from interacting with someone who's from a different generation is absolutely extraordinary. I have spoken with I'd say probably every single one of our volunteers, and I always ask them, why do you want to work with seniors? And many of them come from, our overwhelming majority of volunteers are women, and I'd say the majority are women of color from Southeast Asian or Asian backgrounds, and they will say to me, well, I grew up in an environment where there was a greater role for elderly or seniors. There was a more multi-generational setting, and it's actually bizarre to me not to have this in my life. And I would love to volunteer and make those connections. And that tells you, I think, everything you need to know about what the benefit as a young person of making that connection can be.
Have you got a theory on why this is overwhelmingly a female phenomenon in terms of those who are volunteering to help as opposed to male?
Yeah, I mean, the notion of it being an Eastern population makes a lot more sense because of that tie-in. But I mean, I think just we have the stereotypes of women being more caring, more et cetera, and there's clearly something to that. Motherhood brings with it some level of empathy that maybe some of the males lack. And so I think there's also an understanding of the situation the older people are in. And yeah, it's just that they're more willing to, I think, come to these sort of social, emotional kinds of situations like that.
Pete, you got any advice for us on this stranger danger issue? How we try to be friendly and establish connection while at the same time having the skill to read cues that may say, keep your distance?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is recognizing that over 90% of the time, as Steve pointed out, it actually ends up in a positive experience. And let's not get caught up in the 10%. But to Miriam's comment, it's, we shouldn't be taking away the same protocols that we've had in the past when the spiny senses go up and you say, I don't feel like this is a good situation for me. That shouldn't change. But, we have people that we walk by every day, whether we're standing in a line at a grocery store, we could be talking to a neighbor who lives 5 doors down instead of the one beside us, but we've never exchanged a conversation with them. This is really about awakening all Canadians to the importance of connection and getting it through many, many means in our daily lives. And I think, interestingly enough, because a lot of the social structures that were in our lives before the pandemic, we went to the gym, we used to go to the grocery store to get groceries, we used to go to the office and have a walk to the coffee shop or the lunchroom or all the different places we went. Those have been removed from our lives. And I think when we think about the opportunity that stays within talking to strangers, that we've told people for 50 years, don't talk to strangers. But if we know that those who talk to strangers are 3 times as happy, and we know that over 90% of the time it's a positive experience, I think I have a gap filler that may actually help people feel a greater sense of connection, trust, empathy, compassion, belonging. And it's called Take a Chance and Maybe Talk to a Stranger.
Well, okay, Steve, what if you're a lone wolf? What if you're a deeply introverted person and the notion of that kind of contact with strangers is just absolutely outside your comfort zone?
I mean, our notion of introverted, extroverted is often like how much do you crave, rich social interactions. But if it gets down to how much do you need some close social interactions when the chips get down, and this is where social connection really pays off. When we're under a lot of stress, when the world is being tough on us, these close connections we have allow us to sort of dissipate that, to share the stress and to feel like somebody is there and somebody cares. And even your deepest introvert needs somebody there who cares. When you lose that, that's when you really feel totally, totally isolated. So, it's true they may not crave as much social interaction as somebody else, but they certainly need it as badly as everybody.
When did you start 52 Friends?
I started 52 Friends end of October.
End of October of last year.
Yeah.
So you're not, okay, so you're a little more than halfway through? I'm
at friend number 30.
You're at 30, okay, so that makes sense. Of your efforts to make new friends, how many times have gone well? How many times have not gone well?
I think it's gone well in my case because I think I'm tactful and because I reach out to people who I may have lost touch with or people who run in similar social circles. So I think that I've been tactful and intentional in the people that I reach out to. But I also know that there's this idea that I'm collecting friends, and I don't think that's true. I think that the research shows we only really can have 3 to 5 close friends and 1 to 2 what they call soulmates. So soulmates is someone you can text and say, I just had coffee, or I'm going to the grocery store. And so we don't need 52 friends, but it's really nice to be able to expand our social circles and be vulnerable and practice reaching out to people.
Well, that's the thing. Most, I don't know if I can use this word, most normal people fear rejection when they reach out in the kind of way you're talking about. Do you not?
No, I also think it's like the more times you do something, you increase your chances of being successful. So maybe I'll ask 10 people and one person will say no, but 9 people will say yes. So I'm not going to focus on the one person who said no.
That's the 90-10 theory. There we go.
Well, and I think Miriam's called something out a couple times, and it's part of everything that David's doing, Miriam's doing, and we're doing at the Genwell Project is giving people permission. So Miriam has her project, which allows her the confidence to say, I'm going to reach out to you because I'm doing this project for 52 friends. David has it because I'm reaching out because I'm part of this program that's trying to build a more connected senior in Canada. Well, if we all can create, and this is what the Genwell Project, we're educating people, but also throughout the course of the year, we have Genwell weekends, we have Loneliness Awareness Week, we have a lot of catalytic moments that give people permission to say, you know what, today, Steve, you could talk to your neighbor that you haven't spoken to before, or you might try talking to a stranger, because sometimes we need that little boost that says, okay, it's like St. Patrick's Day, I wear green every year. I have some Irish blood in me, but the rest of the year I don't wear green. Why is it one day of the year I'll put on silly hats, wear green, put buttons on, and drink green beer? Because somebody gave me permission to do it. And that's what Genwell is trying to do, is create that permission so that people understand why, and then give them the opportunity to make it happen.
Steve, if I may add as well, I think that there's maybe a myth about what a socially isolated person might look like, that, you know, they have nobody in their lives, you know, they're only at home. But I think, you know, to Steve's point about perhaps the degradation of the way that we interact caused by social media, you know, their loneliness can look very, very different. I think about, I had a senior reach out to us back in December, self-identifying as, you know, I am completely isolated. I would love to be part of your program. And I called her the next day, and, you know, we got to chatting. She has family. You know, she has kids. Now, they don't live in Canada anymore, but they, you know, they call her occasionally. She had a very successful career. You know, I got off that phone call thinking, you know, my goodness, like, this person sort of quote unquote did everything right, and yet they still had the courage, which many people don't, to say, I need more than this. You know, I need more friends. So, you know, to the point about the richness of having that network and being able to engage with strangers and building that out, it is so important, even if you might think, well, you know, I have a couple of people. It can be more than that, and oftentimes must be.
Can I follow up with you on that?
Of course.
Was she able to tell her family that, yes, you FaceTime me every couple of weeks, but that's not enough?
You know what? I haven't asked her what her comfort level would be with reaching out to her kids to ask them to do more, but I can tell you as a son, as a grandson, I think I certainly feel this way. I'm sure a lot of people do. You can always do more. You can always be calling your mom, your grandfather, the folks in your neighborhood. Like, one of the things that I would love to share with people watching this program is so much of what you can do to combat isolation and loneliness can start at home, and can simply be reaching out to those loved ones in your network or in your community. And we definitely can do more.
We should, I think, make the distinction, Steve, here between being alone and being lonely. Solitude versus isolation and loneliness. Right. What's the difference?
Right. I mean, solitude can be very beneficial. There's a lot of people who find when they spend some time just by themselves, you get away from everything, you get the good thoughts, the good deep reflections. You know, sometimes life-changing moments happen when we're in that deep solitary reflection. Loneliness is more like hunger. It literally is our body telling us there's something we need. We need that social connection. And the normal response to loneliness is to go out and do something. It's just we've sort of created a world now where people find that a very difficult step. And one of the things I love about what all of these people are doing is there's the awareness that this is important. That's hard first, because our conscious mind doesn't always understand the importance of the emotional connections that we have. So we have to kind of convince people through the data, no, this will work. But then we need to give them the practice, because they have difficulty really learning, how do I reach out to somebody? And there are easy tips. You know, I will mention one thing now, which is just something called active listening. If you think, how do I have a conversation? Go check out active listening on the web. Basically become a reporter, almost like yourself, Steve, where you get good at just asking people more questions about their life. And we love that. We love people who are interested in us. And it's very easy to start a conversation in that kind of mode, find the points of connection, and then take it from there. And so it's kind of like, you can get out of this. There's that anxiety, but we can get you by the anxiety and bring you to that more comfortable place.
Miriam, this notion of alone versus lonely, have you experienced this?
Definitely. I think that we need to learn to be alone, and that being alone can be really beneficial. I also think that sometimes when we're struggling, we have this idea that we need to separate ourselves from everyone and just suffer by ourselves, when we can learn how to be alone if within the context of other people. We can only discover ourselves within the context of other people, is what I mean. And then so once we learn how to be with people, we can learn how to do both at the same time, is what I'm trying to say. Is you can also enjoy your time alone, enjoy your solitude, and enjoy your time in relationships.
Right. All right, in our remaining moments here, let me just take everybody down the road. If we all follow your advice, let's say we all just take that extra step, we make that effort to talk to that stranger, we try to make some new friends, we try to stay in touch with our senior relatives and so on. Steve, take us 5 years down the road. What does society look like?
I mean, we know how polarized society is right now, and that's caused by a lack of trust, a feeling that that person is other, different, etc. What social connection does is tear that all down. It literally, the more we interact with others, the more we understand them, the less we fear them, and the better we're able to have good communications with them. So, you know, a lot of the things that we all gnash our teeth at when we look at society today, this is the path to making it better.
Pete, what does our society look like 5 years down the road if we do more of what you suggest?
Even as you asked the question, Steve, I became happier. I became motivated because the aspiration is to do just that. And what I think it creates is happier, healthier individuals, workplaces, communities, streets, homes, classrooms, and everybody starts to feel a greater sense of connection. And we know that the research says that when you have that sense of support and that sense of belonging in your whatever that group is, that you are happier and healthier, and over time that will affect all of us. So I think it's a beautiful aspiration, and I think we can make the world a happier and healthier place.
David, I happened to be in on a Zoom call yesterday with the former United Kingdom minister responsible for loneliness. You know, they appointed one in the recent government. And she said, being lonely is as adverse to your health as if you smoked 15 cigarettes a day.
Yes.
So take us down the road. What does a better society look like?
Yeah, I mean, and I apologize for perhaps being the pessimist on the panel. I mean, the scale and scope of the problem is quite dire. I mean, if you look between, say, 2015 to 2035, as a percentage of the population, people older than 65 will go from about 1 in 6 to 1 in 4. And if you are socially isolated at 65, you can expect to live about 3 to 5 years fewer than somebody who has a nourishing social life. One of the things that we say at Companion Link is, you know, let's give those years back. I absolutely adore all the initiatives and work that everybody around this table are doing, but I so fear that the steps that we're taking, you know, we need to go much further to address that problem, because the scale is truly enormous.
We got 20 seconds left for you to tell us where you're going to find your next 22 friends.
I think that kind of playing off of what we're just talking about is we need to be a friendlier collective. And I think when we're a friendlier collective, it's easier to make friends.
Perfect.
So that's how I'm going to find them.
That's great. I want to thank all of you for coming onto our program tonight, starting here on the right side of the table, David Kepis and Miriam Amdur, and on the other side of the table, Pete Bombaci and Steve Jordans. Really important, timely conversation. Thanks for coming in tonight, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve.
Canadians love to think about the noble role we played in the 19th century during the American Civil War, helping to create the Underground Railroad and being a haven for those escaping slavery. But author Julian Sher paints a far more complicated picture in his new book, one that sees spies, mercenaries, and Confederate collaborators circulating among this country's elites. His new book is called The North Star, Canada and the Civil War Plots Against Lincoln. And it brings Julian Sher to our studio. It's great to see you again.
Oh, it's great to be here, Steve.
Let's start with this, because I've known you a little while, and while reading this book, I kept thinking to myself, why is this guy telling this story? How did he get turned on to this story? And then you finally answer the question on page 389.
Well, I have to keep you reading.
Well, yeah, it worked. You're a student in Montreal decades ago. You see a plaque outside the Hudson Bay department store in downtown Montreal. Bing, eureka. What's on that plaque?
Well, the plaque is a tribute to Jefferson Davis, the president of the Slave South. And and I knew by then I wanted to be a journalist, and two questions popped in my mind. Why is there a plaque to the leader of the slave confederacy in my city, and why is it still here? More than 100 years after the Civil War. And it always stayed in my mind. And after doing so many other books on the Hells Angels and Stephen Truscott, I was determined to cast that same journalistic eye to dark secrets in our past.
And that plaque stayed up until when? Just a few years ago.
Until all the statues are coming down, or many statues are coming down in the United States. I'm working at CBC in Toronto. I call my daughter, who at the time was working in the newsroom in Montreal, and I said, you should check. I think that plaque is still up there. Journalists start making calls, and that day, the Bay takes down the plaque. But the point being is it's not about taking down plaques. On the contrary, we don't want to bury our dark past, and that's what this book is about, bringing it to our hearts and minds today.
Indeed, because it's, frankly, much of this was a revelation to me. I didn't realize how deeply entwined, if that's a word, Canadians were in the American Civil War story. So let's do an excerpt here from the book. This is about the aforementioned Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederate States of America. You write, Davis's visit created quite a sensation in this little Niagara, Ontario, where a pleasant Confederate society is springing up. Davis was serenaded by the people of Niagara and their town band. Quote, I thank you sincerely for the honor you have this evening shown to me, Davis told the large crowd that had gathered. May peace and prosperity be forever the blessing of Canada, for she has been the asylum for many of my friends, as she is now an asylum to myself. The adulation continued the next day when all the principal citizens called on him en masse, being introduced by the mayor, the Times reported. He has been made to feel that although in the land of strangers, he is in the midst of friends. And let's again, Sheldon, bring up the next picture here. This is Jefferson Davis with his wife, Verena. This is the champion of slavery, head of the secessionists. He told Robert E. Lee, the general, seeing the adoring Canadian crowds that were receiving him, that they saved his life. Why did he get such a warm welcome up here?
Because I think there was huge swaths of the Canadian population, and especially the elite, the bankers, the newspaper owners, the politicians, the church leaders. They had much more sympathy for the aristocracy in the South than they did in the North. Many Canadians, tens of thousands of Canadians, and especially large numbers of Black Canadians from Southern Ontario, went to fight on Lincoln's side. But the Canadian establishment largely was pro-South. And, the reading you gave is indicative, because Davis, he's lost the war, right? So the war is over. And we know now, after the war was over, it was a war about slavery. It may not have begun that way, but it ends that way. He loses the war. He's in jail for 2 years. And when he gets out on bail, that night, bang, he takes a train to Montreal. He knows Canada is a safe haven for him, as it had been for his Confederates.
Well, okay, this requires further explanation, because I'm trying to understand how an ordinary guy, let's say from Kingston, Ontario, back in the 1860s, somehow feels he has something in common with people from Jackson, Mississippi, who own slaves, who have this view of the South that would be completely antithetical to much of what we would consider civilized life here.
Today, but back then, opinions were much more divided. I think you have to start, from a business and from an elite point of view. Canada was part of the British Empire. We were just a few years away from becoming Canada. Britain and Canada were officially neutral. Now think of what that means, right? I mean, Lincoln was furious because it means neutral between a legitimate government of Lincoln and a slave secessionist South. But it meant that by being neutral, it meant that Confederates could come to Canada in ways they couldn't go to New York or Boston. They could live here openly. They could raise money for what became terrorist attacks. They could make speeches. And there was an affinity that the Canadian aristocracy felt with these. In Niagara, era. You had a community of well-heeled people and beautiful mansions where Confederate ambassadors would hang out with the Canadian elite. Same with most of our newspapers. So business, Britain, 80% of Britain's cotton came from the South. Britain was, the navy yards in Britain were making money. Canada, Halifax, Toronto, people were making money getting around Lincoln's blockade and supporting the South. So there were business reasons. There were political reasons, because there was an affinity with the South. And frankly, a lot of leaders were not enthused about equality, much less freedom for the 4 million blacks that were enslaved.
All right, you've told us about Montreal. What other cities and or towns around, let's say, Ontario for the moment, did secessionists hang out in back then?
Well, Toronto, the Queen's Hotel, now the Royal Fairmount, right, was known as a Confederate hangout. In fact, the leader of the Confederate Secret Service, a man named Jacob Thompson in Canada, took over whole suites at the Queen's Hotel. The bar in the Queen's Hotel was known as a hangout for Confederate raiders. But there were so many spies there that there was a Toronto aristocrat named George Taylor Denison III. He had a huge villa on the whole western part of what is now, Ossington in Toronto and any part west. And he opened up his villa to the Confederates. He said, stay here. It's safer than the Queen's Hotel. Most of the newspapers in Toronto supported the South. And you go through...
Intensely.
Yeah, intensely.
We're glowing in their praise of the South.
Absolutely, absolutely.
This is 60 years after we've outlawed slavery here.
Yes, but, again, imagine Lincoln has been assassinated, right? Today we think, wow, imagine the horror. If you were walking in the streets of Toronto and you picked up a copy of the Toronto Leader, one of the main newspapers, right, you would have read, and this is word for word, they said that there is justifiable reason. For Lincoln's assassination because of his oppression of the people in the South. If you were in London, right, vacationing, or that's where you lived, the London Examiner, the paper there deliberately said that Booth's deed is literally justified by the facts because the man he killed murdered the Constitution of the United States. So that's what people were reading in most of the newspapers.
All right, you mentioned Booth. Let's get to him. John Wilkes Booth. That is him, the actor who at Ford's Theater snuck up behind Abraham Lincoln, put a pistol behind his head, and tried to blow his brains out. He assassinated the President of the United States. Where was he hanging out and plotting mere months before he assassinated Abraham Lincoln?
It's October 1864. Booth has already formulated and has begun to plot out a kidnapping plot. He wants to first kidnap the president and then force the freedom of so many Confederate soldiers. Where does he go? Montreal. He knows Canada is a haven for Confederates. He hangs out at the St. Lawrence Hall, the most luxurious hotel in British North America. The owner there, Henry Hogan, says that this was the headquarters, he says quite proudly, for the Confederate junta. Booth is playing cards with leading agents. He meets with an important agent and gets the names of two people who are part of the underground network in Maryland and Virginia, and he'll use that connection after he kills Lincoln. But most frighteningly, one night he's drinking a lot, and I say that if Montreal was the Casablanca during the Civil War, Dooley's Bar was Rick's Cafe. Booth walks in, and he's famous, right? I mean, he's known everywhere. But possibly the only person who was more famous than him in that pool hall is a man named Joseph Dion, who's the Quebec pool champion. Two men start playing pool, and Dion remarks, and will later report, the words don't mean that much at the time, Lincoln is up for re-election in a couple of weeks. And these are the words of John Wilkes Booth. He's shooting pool in Montreal, and he says, doesn't matter whether Abe is re-elected or not. Abe's contract is nearly up. His goose is cooked. And a few months later, he will fire that bullet, thanks to support and money and operational skills that he picks up in Montreal.
There would have been nobody else in that pool hall who overheard those words, who maybe might have wanted to go to the authorities and say, I happen to be hearing that, ...
Well, except that there were so many. Look, Lincoln had to sneak into Washington on his first inauguration when, right. Because there was so much hatred against him, he had to sneak and disguise himself on the train.
His life was always under threat.
His life was always under threat, and Booth was not an exception. I think what was even more worrisome was the fact, Booth was just thinking of these ideas, but because Canada was neutral, because the banks and the newspapers and a lot of the political leaders gave haven, it meant that the Confederates could use our country as a base to launch what we would now call terrorist attacks.
Mm-hmm. As they did when they, I think, where was it? Vermont, where they tried to spring some guys out of jail there?
No, Vermont, what they did is
Was that the St. Albans raid?
There was the St. Albans raid. They robbed 3 banks, stole $250,000 in that money back then, which would have been millions more, killed an innocent bystander. Dash across the border. Lincoln and the Union Army is ready to invade Canada. Most of the culprits are arrested. They're put on trial. The judge throws out the case on a technicality. And it's important to remember that these Confederate soldiers stood in court and said, "We did it, but we are soldiers. You have declared neutrality. You can't punish us for what we did." The Montreal police chief is given the money they stole for safekeeping, and he hands it back to the robbers, and he will be fired for collaborating with the Confederates.
Sheldon, page 4, please, at the bottom. When Lincoln is killed, a Washington proclamation exclaimed his death was caused mostly by those, quote, harbored in Canada. And there's the shot of the picture of the wanted poster, a $100,000 reward, which again, 180 years ago, that's real money. For the murderer, 50 grand. For those still at large, 25 grand for others as well. Where did all of John Wilkes Booth's accomplices escape to?
Well, the alleged accomplices were
we're still
5 or
saying
6.
Alleged? We're still saying alleged all these years later?
Because a lot of them were political accomplices that maybe didn't have blood on their hand. But they were living in Canada. John Surratt, Booth's closest friend, the man who was later put on trial and would get acquitted for being an accomplice, he's in Montreal. He's hidden by the Catholic Church in small villages for several months over the summer. Then the Quebec Catholic Church sends an endorsement letter so he could hide out in the Pope's army in Rome until he is captured. That's the kind of collaboration we made. One of the You can't make this stuff up. There was a man who spent a lot of time in Toronto and in Montreal. He lived in Canada. His name was Dr. Luke Blackburn. Right? He was considered...
Got a picture of him? Sheldon, bring that up. Dr. Luke Blackburn.
Dr. Luke Blackburn was considered one of the leading experts in fighting yellow fever, which was devastating towns all through the south and north in the U.S. He volunteers to fight this huge epidemic in Bermuda, but nurses are noticing that he's gathering the soiled clothing and the handkerchiefs where people would vomit in as they died. It was called the black vomit. What we then found out is he ships 6 of these trunks to Halifax. From there, he will organize a plot to have these trunks shipped all through the United States, including one box he hopes to the White House, because he wants to infect people with yellow fever and kill thousands, he says.
This is germ warfare.
It was biological warfare.
Weapons, yeah.
And when the plot is discovered, there is outrage, as you could imagine. The New York Times calls him the hideous devil. Why is Canada harboring him? They didn't know at the time yellow fever isn't transmitted through clothing, but it was an example of the lengths that Canadian Confederates were going to, and we were protecting them.
It's interesting, Julian, that somehow people in the South found slavery acceptable, but they found this attempt by Blackburn to engage in germ warfare. That was beyond the pale, apparently.
That's right.
Interesting set of values there.
And that kind of hypocrisy, I think, ran through so much of Canadian policy when it came to the Civil War.
A lot of piracy on the Great Lakes back then. What was that about?
Well, if you think about it, big part of the border, because Canada didn't really exist as a country west of Ontario, were the Great Lakes. And the important towns, most importantly, in order to keep prisoners away, Confederate prisoners, the Union kept them in prisons that were as north as possible, but that also meant they were right near the Canadian border. So the Confederate soldiers who were hanging out in Toronto, in Niagara, would try to commandeer ships, hoping to attack the port cities on the southern side of the Great Lakes, and even bomb and free the prisoners. When some of these plots were discovered, it was called exactly what it was, piracy. You know, what's interesting is we have a view, I think, we feel now that, oh, if the Civil War started now, we would obviously be on the side of good. But, you know, for many of our leaders and prominent establishment people and many Canadians, it wasn't that obvious. And yet, if you had asked Jefferson Davis, the head of the South, and Lincoln what they thought of Canada, they both would have said the same thing. Just, you know, Davis would have said, it's a great asylum for my boys, and Lincoln would have cursed Canada for being an asylum.
Do you know what, though? I remember interviewing Richard Gwynn about this very issue many years ago, the late Richard Gwynn, and he said that Canadians were as concerned about the North as they were about the South because they feared that after the war was over, Lincoln would come up north and try to take over British North America.
Well, it wasn't just a fear. There were members of Lincoln's cabinet who were openly annexationist. So for sure there was that fear. And it is also true that the Civil War and the mayhem that it caused was an important factor in pushing Canada to Confederation. Yeah. The war ended in 1865 and we became a country in 1867. I think what's important, though, is we have to realize, whether we like it or not, our country was born amidst the blood and the hatred of the Civil War. And I think we have to face up to not just the glorious things we did, but also the dark side of Canada's support.
But let's make sure we get this in context here. By that I mean, are we talking about more than just sort of a radical fringe that would have supported the South back then, or are we talking more widespread support in Canada?
Well, I think most importantly, I think among the ordinary population, there's evidence, as I said, tens of thousands of ordinary Canadians signed up overwhelmingly on Lincoln's side. 2 black doctors, the first 2 black doctors in Canada, one was an American, one was Canadian-born, made history by joining Lincoln's army as surgeons, fought racism and discrimination, treated the black soldiers who were now fighting for Lincoln's side. So we have a lot to be proud of doctors like that.
Is that Anderson Abbott there we're looking at?
Yeah,
this picture right there?
Anderson Ruffin Abbott, the first native-born Canadian doctor, graduate of U of T. He and his colleague, 2 black doctors, are fighting bravely in Washington, and one night they decide to crash a party at the White House. There's a levee, and Lincoln is there, and according to Abbott's telling, like, there's a hush in the room. Here are these really cool-looking soldiers in uniform. They're black men. There's a hush, and they go over, and according to Abbott, Lincoln shakes their hand, and it kind of shows the path-breaking role that this Canadian man played. But that being said, the powerful people, the bankers, the leading politicians. Look, John A. Macdonald, the father of Confederation, the father of our country, 1864, he makes a speech in which he talks about the bravery of the Southern Republic and what an amazing fight they have put up. John Abbott, the dean of the McGill Law School, who will become our 3rd prime minister, he becomes famous defending those raiders in the St. Albans raid in Vermont, and he helps win their case.
Back to Abbott for a second. Dr. Abbott, where was he the night Lincoln was killed?
He's in Washington. Abbott is in Washington, and he talks. It's Good Friday, right? It's Easter week. The city is ablaze with lights. There are celebrations. The war is over. Lincoln has won the war, and he's out celebrating. And suddenly there's a knock on the door. He's parting with some friends, and they get news that Lincoln has been assassinated. And according to his telling, he accompanies Elizabeth Keckley, who was a black maidservant and confidant to Mary Lincoln. And he walks through the streets. Now he's scared. people didn't know, was this a coup? Was
Well, it
more
was
things?
actually.
And it was. There was an attempt. People forget they killed Lincoln, but Booth's plan was to kill the vice president and the secretary of State, and in effect carry out a political coup on the dying days of. So even Abbott talks about, I was worried as a black man walking through the streets of Washington. He accompanies Keckley, so he comes close to the Lincoln's death bed, and he will later be given by Mary Lincoln a shawl that Lincoln wore, and he kept it and treasured it, and it was eventually given to a museum in the United States. There's actually a new plaque that's going to be going out soon in Toronto in honor of Anderson Abbott and also Alexander Augusta, the American black doctor. So, you know, again, I think Canada was a North Star. We were the beacon of freedom to so many American blacks, and many of our citizens played a courageous role, but they did that in spite of the support that the establishment gave.
We were a North Star for the South as well.
We were. We were. I mean, we started this conversation with, you know, don't have to take my word at it. You know, Jefferson Davis praises Canada for being that asylum. And you know, I think the point, certainly for me as a journalist, is to, if you want, rescue history from, you know, the dusty archives and make it both read as a political thriller, but also make it relevant to us. You know, there's an opening scene where a young woman from New Brunswick, she's a farm girl, and she chafes at the restrictions against women, so she disguises herself as a man to be a book salesman. She lands up in the States. The war starts, and she says, as I quote, she says, "This wasn't my country. This wasn't my war." And she said, "I had to decide which side am I on." She will sign up, disguise herself as a man, become one of the most famous women fighting for Lincoln. Her name is Emma Edmonds. There she is. And she will later go all the way to Congress. She will become a hero, and she's named in Congress decades after the war. But her line, "Which side am I on?" I think, you know, beckons us today on issues that are still plaguing us today. And it's not obvious to everybody, which side will you be on when there are battles for justice?
Well, let's do one. We're going to finish up on this guy here. Sheldon, bottom of page 8, can I see a picture of Edward Doherty, please, who, again, is a Canadian who enlists with the North, with the Union. And, okay, Julian, tell us about his claim to fame, because this is amazing.
Well, again, Edward Doherty is so typical of the ordinary Canadians who aren't agreeing with what they're reading in the newspapers or what the church leaders or some of the politicians are saying. He, like many Canadians, born in Eastern Townships, lands up in New York. The Civil War breaks out. He meets a bunch of friends, and that day he just goes and signs up with the Union Army. He rises in the ranks. Lincoln is assassinated on a Friday. Monday morning, Edward Doherty, this Canadian, is sitting in Lafayette Park opposite the White House, and he gets orders to report to the War Department. He shows up, he's given 2 pictures, and he realizes he is being named to lead the regiment that will try to hunt down John Wilkes Booth. 12 days they hunt through Maryland and Virginia. He's leading the regiment along with 2 other detectives. They track Booth down to a farmhouse. Doherty and the others confront Booth. Booth is killed by a gunshot. He's dying on the porch. Edward Doherty, a Montrealer, will be there witnessing his death. And as they search through the pockets, right? So a Montrealer leads the regiment that tracks down Lincoln's killer. As they search through the pockets, in the pockets of John Wilkes Booth, Lincoln's assassin, they find a bank draft, a traveler's check that he had taken out at a bank in Montreal. And so it just shows how intertwined we were with the Civil War on both sides.
I've been to Arlington many times, seen JFK's final resting place, RFK's. I learned in your book that's where Edward Doherty's final resting place is, Arlington National Cemetery.
That's right.
In Virginia. And he's the guy, and he's Canadian. So next time I go to Arlington, I'm looking for that.
Yeah.
Is it easy to find?
It is. It is. You look out. You look out the numbers. You know, speaking of Arlington Cemetery, and I think this is a good place to end on in terms of what it means for us today. The Civil War is the only war I know of where the losers got to write the history. Right, the lost cause movement, right, which is still going on. If you look at the debates going on today in the U.S., in Florida and elsewhere about critical race theory and let's not talk about racism in our schools, the whole idea of trying to whitewash the history is still alive and vibrant today. So the lost cause movement was important in the U.S. and in Canada with movies like Gone with the Wind, trying to portray the South as equally as justified as the North.
Birth of a Nation.
That's right. The first Hollywood movie, which glorified the Klan. One of the leaders, one of the Confederate leaders who led that raid in Vermont, comes back as a hero in 1915 to Canada and makes speeches about bygones be bygones. But he is behind the building of a Confederate memorial in Arlington Cemetery, a huge memorial with President Wilson there. And one of the black doctors that we talked about, Alexander Augusta, was buried in the segregated section of Arlington Cemetery while the president was glorifying the Confederates. So that's why the Civil War is not dead. You know, in the book I quote in 2008 a little-known American senator, a man I think Lincoln would have been proud of. His name was Barack Obama, and he's running for president, not that well known, and he quotes William Faulkner, a very famous Southern writer, and Barack Obama, the quote is, the past is not dead, the past is not even the past. And I think what Barack Obama was saying, I know what he was saying, is that the legacy of the Civil War and those debates are still ongoing. And I think it's true for Canada, that we've for too long been patting ourselves on the back, saying, well, we were the good guys. Well, some of us were the good guys, but not all of us, and we have a reckoning.
And you've told the story so well. The North Star, Canada, and the Civil War plots against Lincoln. Julian Sher, thanks for coming to TVO and telling us all about it.
Thank you.
And that is the agenda for Wednesday, May 10th, 2023. Tomorrow is a time to heed the experts calling for some sober second thought on artificial intelligence. We'll examine that. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
From Thunder Bay to Hamilton and points east to west and in between, our Ontario hubs cover the province. You can find the latest stories from our hubs journalists and videos with a wider perspective anytime at tvo.org/OntarioHubs.